and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. Since you're here, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the video as well so that more people get to know about us. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive information. If you like our content, please contribute to keep it alive. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. Let me also inform you about the Bharata First Knowledge Center, your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. I will be starting live big picture current affairs classes very shortly, so don't miss the chance to interact with me. Go to kc.bharatafirst.com and register right now. Hundreds are reaping the benefits of the Knowledge Center. Don't be left behind. All this information, along with some must-see recommendations, are in the description of the video. Please go through it. And now on to the discussion. The Supreme Court on Monday expressed concern over 8 state governments, all non-BJP ruled states, not granting general consent to the Central Bureau of Investigation to carry out investigation in their respective states, describing it as not a desirable position. Maharashtra, Punjab, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Jharkhand, West Bengal, Kerala, and Mizoram have withdrawn their general consent to the CBI to investigate cases within their territory, alleging that the central agency was being misused by the BJP-ruled Centre for political witch hunt and vendetta. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze why the Supreme Court is concerned over 8 states not giving consent for CBI probes. Joining me on the program today are ML Sharma, former Special Director, CBI, Yashovardhan Azad, Chairman Deep Strat and former Special Director, IB, and also Piyush Singh, Advocate of the Supreme Court. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Piyush, let me start the program with you first. Let's first understand and analyze the act under which the CBI is governed with and what are the special powers of the CBI.
Frank, the CBI in itself is constituted in the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act 1946. So since 1946, we had several rounds of amendment in the original act. But if I have to give you a brief outline of the act was primarily constituted to look into notified offences by the civil government. So the basic theme of today's discussion, I would say, when I come to the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, is the federal structure of the country. So when we gained our independence, the very basic structure of the constitution was a federal structure. So it was analyzed or it was realized that in case the central government deems fit for any offense for which a power should be given to a centralized agency to investigate into any crime committed within the territory of a state. So that powers under those notified offenses should be there. So that was the primary purpose. The governing act is Delhi Special Police Establishment Act. And the salient sections, I would say, would be primarily 3 sections or maybe 4 sections, which are primarily the more salient features. Under section 3, there are notified offences for which the CBI under this particular act would have the powers to investigate the offences. And for getting the consent from the respective state government, the central government under section 5 has to notify that this act is applicable on which states or is applicable on which territories of India. So originally when the act was applicable, it was on the union territories, not all the states. Section 6 of the act gives the power, I would say, gives the prerogative to the state governments to give their consents to the central government to have the CBI or to for the territory or for the consent wherein the CBI can investigate into offences in the territory of that particular state. So 3, 5, and 6, those are the primarily salient features of the act. And majority of the states had given their consent under section 6. And once that consent is given by a respective state government, the central government may, under the notification, a separate notification under section 5, can notify that that particular state has given the consent. So that was primarily the theme of the act. And usually what we have seen that, as I pointed out, majority of the states, other than the UTs also, UTs being primarily covered, had given their consent. So there was never a problem. Now, initially there were 3 states which had withdrawn their consent. Now there are around 8 states which have withdrawn their consent. So that has primarily come out because of the kind of backlash which is there presently between the ruling regime in the central government and the respective state governments which are there.
Absolutely. Mr. Sharma, let me bring you in now. How would you look at this particular aspect of 8 states now deciding to withdraw, giving consent the CBI to probe cases or investigations?
Well, my friend has spoken about the federal structure. I also respect the federal structure. And mind you, this provision, Section 6, that is consent of the state government, it was put into place even before the Constitution came into being, because it was a vast country and therefore the central government didn't want to usurp all the powers to itself. So you have to see in this light. But as the things turn out today, according to me, I respect federal structure. The position taken by many state governments, 8, is very stupid. And I'll give 4 reasons for this. One, those investigations which are already underway, there is no estoppel to these investigations. This is a Supreme Court ruling in Dorji, Rendub Dorji versus Central Bureau of Investigation, which means that investigations already underway, they will continue to be investigated. Therefore, it doesn't affect the cases already in investigation. But it bars the CBI registering fresh cases. So this is one aspect. Second aspect is that the consent of the state government had a meaning before the judgment of Calcutta High Court to say that despite the statutory provision of Section 6, the constitutional courts in their writ jurisdiction can always order a CBI investigation regardless of in which state offense is taken. And this was confirmed by the Supreme Court in 2010. The position is, let any government withdraw consent. If the constitutional courts decide to entrust a case to the CBI, they have legally empowered and constitutionally empowered themselves to do so. So for this reason also, it's a totally meaningless exercise. And the third reason that I want to give is that governance has become very complex and very difficult. One rape case, one sensational murder case, and the state governments the pressure. They want the weight off their shoulder or their back, and therefore they themselves are interested in handing over cases to CBI. Result is all controversial cases, complicated cases come to the CBI. So it is in their own interest when they are under pressure, and for their own interest, they hand over the case to CBI, and therefore the withdrawal of consent is nothing, according to me, but political gimmick. And lastly, and it's very important, you see, even though CBI loses jurisdiction when the state government withdraws a consent, but the jurisdiction of the Income Tax Department and now the Enforcement Directorate, PMLA, Prevention of Money Laundering Act, that falls within the power of the central government. Now, frankly speaking, now ED has become more important than the Central Bureau of Investigation. So therefore, for all these reasons, according to me, the steps or the thought process of the state governments is totally faulty. All important cases will continue to come to CBI despite the withdrawal of the concept. Therefore, I call it a much ado about nothing.
Okay, much ado about nothing in one sentence is what Mr. Sharma's point of view is as far as this whole issue is concerned. Mr. Azad, let me bring you into the picture. You've seen several of these wings, several of these departments from very close quarters. When you look at the CBI in particular, like, I'd like to take the point that Mr. Sharma is making forward about how sensational cases, difficult cases always go to the CBI. But when it comes to some of these other cases, it's nothing but, a political issue. And that's what we are looking at right now. What are your thoughts on this?
First, let me say that Mr. Emil Sharma is perhaps the last word on the CBI. And he should have been made the director CBI. But for, again, political reasons, he wasn't made. Now, I totally agree with him. India is a fractured polity. and the federal structure is in tremendous strain. And therefore, I totally agree with him that the consent which has not been given rests purely on political reasons. Mind you, in this country today, any crime, any case which has a bearing on politics, corruption, mind you, CBI has three wings. It's an anti-corruption wing, it has the economic offences wing, and it has special crimes division. Any crime which pertains and it falls on the political character, if it's a corruption case against a politician, which the states are most worried about and which they always say is politically motivated, is the one which actually worries them. Secondly, as Mr. Sharma said, if there's any case in which there is a political pressure which comes in the form of a special crime, they themselves want to give it to the CBI. So this is how, look at, this is the case of the central paramilitary forces also. Whenever there is a simple law and order, they'll beg the state for the central paramilitary forces. And when BSF extends its jurisdiction only for its center acts till 50 kilometers, and which has been there in other states, they shout that they have been encroached upon by the central government. So therefore, you see, initially, during earlier days, when the center and the states were of the same political hue, there was no problem. Today, all kinds of things are happening. He's absolutely right when he says ED has more clout today. The NIA has more clout. Terror cases are taken up by them, and there is no problem. Look at the NCB. It goes and it catches about 6 grams in Mumbai. Let them shout whatever they shout. But they're able to do it effectively all over the country with their zonal offices. I would blame the political nature of our system and the political parties, the way they function, that these things will keep on boiling over. Simple case of insecurity. If the center gives a particular security Z+ to a protectee, if it's an opposition state, and if the protectee goes there, they downgrade him. So this is the real problem today. And I'm telling you, this will lead to a fracas. It will lead to very serious problems later. And unless there is a sagacious approach by the politicians across the parties to come together on basic issues, it will be a problem. And my last point, technically, why should anyone bother about CBI investigation when, unless they don't feel that CBI will be, partial, or CBI is motivated by the center's, colors? This is extremely unfortunate. Look at the performance of the CBI. If you take away the corruption cases, instituted against the people, all cases, their conviction is the highest. Their forensics is the best. In all respects, you have outstanding officers in the CBI, but because any cases catch the taint, you had it. Today, there are over 11,000 cases pending. And between 2018 and 20, in 150 cases, CBI has made a request for specific consent. It's a serious problem, and we need a serious deliberation on this.
Absolutely. I'm going to take that point forward with Mr. Sharma in just a bit. But before that, Piyush, let me come to you and, talk about another aspect as well. Now, what I want to understand from you is if the law provides a safety net or a safety mechanism for the CBI.
Safety net or safety mechanism for the CBI? For the
CBI. So does the Act deal with that, especially when the CBI is dealing with such high profile cases, when it's getting into matters like, political corruption and so many other aspects. So does the CBI have some kind of a firewall?
See, every public officer, Frank, in the statute, or I would say in the law itself, every public servant doing their bona fide duties are protected. So I think your question arises from a very recent incident, not a very recent, but it has been over a year now, when the CBI stepped into West Bengal for investigating one of the offences. One of the officers of the CBI was detained by the police department there. So that is definitely there. There is no particular provision under this particular act which gives them immunity of any sort as such. because who will, the guardians, CBI being the investigating authority in such cases, there is no specific provision which gives them immunity per se. But I would want to just answer one larger theme of question, Frank, that what are we discussing? So there are two aspects of looking into it. So we are not discussing whether the consent withdrawn by the state is right or wrong. Because in case we are presuming that CBI is one of the best investigating agencies of the country, then I would say that every matter, every crime committed, be it a rape or murder, because even 302 and 376 are notified under Section 3 of the Delhi Special Police Establishment Act, then every of those offences, I believe, should be handed over to the CBI. If the argument is CBI is a better agency, then every offence should be handed over to CBI, number one. Number two, if that is not the argument, then how can one crime be treated to be more grave and which will require a more better political ideology or should be transferred to CBI than the other crime? How can one murder be differentiated from the other murder? How can one rape be differentiated from other rape? That is my primary question. Now, in case we give that consent, now why the consent of state was required and why did I point it out to the federal structure? The question is not about how CBI functions. Now, again, when we say CBI has done a fantastic job, we also have to remember it was the Supreme Court which termed or which gave the term a caged parrot to CBI in 2013. So that term of caged parrot was used by Supreme Court in 7 other judgments, mind you. So those things have happened in the past, unfortunately. And in case CBI was working independently throughout, there would have been no, I would say, requirement of making an amendment into Section 4A of this particular act, thereby having the director of CBI to be nominated by the special commission or a committee. So now previously it was at the whims and fancies of the central government. But now the director is appointed by the Prime Minister, the leader of opposition and in Lok Sabha and the Chief Justice of India. And 6 months back, a few months back, when the new director was appointed, the Chief Justice of India had to invoke a rule in which he quoted a judgment that why the list or the names given by the central government should not be appointed because they had a tenure of less than 6 months. So we have to take all those things into consideration before pointing out that it is a brilliant agency. Yes, it is a brilliant agency. There's no doubt about it. But it again, when we are taking something into consideration of political consideration, it can be for the central government, it can be for the state governments as well. So when a political will is given and when the constitution envisages the federal structure, when police and law and order comes under the state subject, so it is a state subject. There's no doubt about it. None of us is arguing that whether it is a central subject or under the state list. So to that extent, yes, definitely every state should have the power to give the consent in case they're authorized under the main act or not.
Points well taken. Let me take the points that you're making forward with Mr. Sharma. Mr. Sharma has armed himself with the legal book as well, it seems, on his table. So Mr. Sharma, the floor is yours. Go ahead. And I think it's a valid point that Piyush is making. There is no doubt nobody is questioning the argument that the CBI is the best investigating agency in the country. And how do you differentiate between two murders? One is a high profile and the other is not, because a life is a life at the end of the day.
I have a little difference of opinion with our young friend Piyush. See, a prime minister's assassination, a chief minister's assassination, and I happen to investigate one, Ben Singh assassination way back in 1995, is totally different dimensions.
Absolutely.
So therefore, to say that every case stands on the same footing, life is not like that. You can see my fingers, they are not equal. This is a basic philosophy of life which one has to understand. There are differences in crime and therefore gravity and therefore and the consequences of such crimes. And therefore, there has to be a specialized agency to investigate some of these crimes. But I come to a broader point, and that broader point is that America is the ideal federation in the world, right? And I have armed for myself with this book. I think it's the only book available perhaps in the country, that Federal Criminal Code and Rules America. You see, even though it's the ideal federation, first federation of its kind, they have identified about 2,000 crimes. 2,000, could be even more. 2,000 crimes which are investigatable under law by the FBI. So when this is a situation there, this proves my point or supports my point that some crimes need to be investigated at a bigger level, higher level than other crimes. So therefore, I don't totally agree with him. Every crime is not equal. There has to be a specialized agency. Terrorist cases, you see the perspective of a local investigating officer, be it Jaisalmer in Rajasthan or Jharkhand, Bihar, the investigator's perspective will be totally different from what an officer sitting in a federal agency, like the good work being done, as my friend Yashovardhan said, by the NIA in terrorist crimes. I mean, it's simply, so therefore I say there is a need in the country, and very wisely the British government came up with this law. Somehow, because of political reasons, you see all kind of problems are being created. I believe in federal structure. In ordinary circumstances, law and order being state subject, most of the crimes should be investigated by the local police forces. But there are some crimes which need to go to national agencies so that they can take a bigger view of the matter. They have longer hands. Even though it's said that the hand of law is long, but I'm saying federal agencies have longer hands, and some crimes need these longer hands. I have some different opinion on this, and I think we need to strengthen, reinforce the CBI and other national agencies. Now, our friend also talked briefly, of course, this is not the subject matter of discussion or the appointment of director CBI and all that. My personal view is that ever since new system has been put into place, that is involvement of the Chief Justice, the selection of director, CBI, I'm sorry to say, and I worked in the agency for 20 years, the quality of directors selected, instead of going up, has gone down. I hope it is not a contempt, but this is my opinion. So
just a quick follow-up question, Mr. Sharma. I'm coming to you, Mr. Azad. Just give me a moment, please. A follow-up question. Should we then define the kind of cases that the CBI should take up?
Yes. You see, today, as Piyush said, Section 3, CBI can investigate only those crimes which are notified by the central government in Section 3. So there are about 200 or 300 crimes which have been notified. Numbers I'm not sure. But I'm saying in America, there are about 2,000 crimes. Yes, we can take this exercise. And we can undertake this exercise and we can notify offenses. But then it's not going to change the situation. Politics is politics. All this withdrawal of consent is nothing but politics. And it's a dirty politics. They don't know what.
Points taken. Yes, Mr. Azad, you wanted to make a point. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes. Let me. No, I want to make a whole series of points.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Starting with the point that I reiterate that CBI is the best agency in the country. And this is not the reason why all the cases should be pumped onto them. I totally believe in the federal character. Let me say, I'm from Madhya Pradesh, and we had one of the best crime units. Andhra perhaps has one of the best investigating agencies. That is not an issue at all. For everything we can quote laws, scriptures, constitutions, but there's a thing called common sense. There is a thing called reality. Look at reality. The most stupid cases are given by the state. They want it off their head, which can easily be investigated by them to the CBI. CBI is not dying for cases. CBI is getting cases which are sometimes thrust upon them. CBI is not interested because they don't have the capacity to handle so many cases. In fact, Supreme Court the other day wanted them to strengthen the prosecution system, and they were supposed to bring up their caseload and tell exactly what they have performed. The leadership is a different part, and I totally agree with Mr. M.L. Sharma. CBI leadership has got 2 years fixity of tenure. That's good enough to act in a proper way. Yes, the Supreme Court called it a caged pirate. It's a fact. Unless you choose good leaders, unless you give the best infrastructure, a third-rate structure can't give you a first-rate performance. And that's exactly my point. Any case which becomes politically tainted, and the CBI falls on its feet. And that is why some of the corruption cases go slow, some of the corruption cases go fast, Mind you, the material is there, whether it's in West Bengal, whether it's in UP. But as per reality, it's a kind of a different year altogether. And that's why I want to maintain that unless you give some kind of autonomy, the police reform, there are so many other things which you have to do. This system will continue. Today, if there is a corruption being investigated by the CBI, why should it be stopped by any particular state for investigating the central government employees? The Calcutta High Court has extended that jurisdiction. So, all the time quoting laws and scriptures and constitution and just putting aside common sense will not go. Today we are in a serious problem. If the framers of the constitution did not realize that the polity will be so fractured that on every issue the state and the government will fight, if NIA would not have been there, what would have happened to the terror cases? I can tell you, being in the IB, what would have happened, and Mr. M.L. Sharma would also know. The states would not give consent in certain terror cases, good, bad, or ugly. And that's why we have to take a sagacious view. We have to come together. It's not a question of CBI is the best organization or state is the organization or state should give consent or not give consent. We have to see how we tackle organized crime. We have to see how we tackle corruption, border issues. That is the issue. I'll give you a very simple example. The sacrilege case in 2015 was handed over by Punjab because it was a SAD Shiromani Akali Dal to the CBI. All right? Why? Because there was tremendous pressure in Punjab. And when Mr. Amrinder Singh came, he took back the case and SIT was formed. These are the kind of things which are happening. Is this a joke? That's my point.
Absolutely. And your points are all well taken. It's time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward and what needs to be done to improve the situation. Starting first with you, Piyush Singh.
Frank, I would say that what approach has been followed so far, suggesting that common sense should take over the constitution, I would not advise that. That means that the constitution does not have a common sense in itself. So what I would say that the law which has been laid down by the framers of, and I would again quote the constitution because this is a legal topic we're talking here. And I would say that how the consent is granted, once a state takes back the consent, as Mr. Sharma has pointed out, there is already a legal provision in place. That is, the high courts can grant consent, or high court in the writ petition can give a direction in a particular matter in which that can be done. Number two is that in case a consent is withdrawn, on a case-to-case basis, the state government, once being a request being made by the Central CBI, Central Bureau of Investigation, can again give a consent. So I would say the framework is already there. And in case any of those consents are pending, the CBI has already a legal remedy to approach the appropriate high court for getting the consent being expedited.
Absolutely. Mr. Sharma, best way forward.
First, the state governments which have withdrawn the consent, they should restore it. They have acted foolishly. They should realize it. There's absolutely no gain. As I said, it's much ado about nothing. As it is, cases will keep on coming to the CBI. And now CBI is registering cases through subterfuge. There's a mechanism by which they're registering cases and defying the withdrawal. I'll not disclose this to you. I'm in the private sector now. So therefore, I run a law firm. I know how to do it. This is one. Two, the director CBI appointment, everything depends on one man in CBI, and that is a director. So he should be a man of sterling qualities, good integrity, professional rigor, and political neutrality. So the present system, which they have brought 10 years back, has not produced results. Prime Minister is responsible to the country for everything, and therefore this power should be restored to the Prime Minister. Let him choose a good director, he'll be responsible, he'll face the music. Let him choose a bad director, let him face the music. This is number two. And three, you see CVC, with a lot of pomp and show, this institution was brought in. It has produced no results at all. And therefore, the channel of CVC to kind of administratively control CBI in anti-corruption matters, it has not helped at all. And therefore, it should be abolished. And the the CBI should directly report to, like NIA reports to MHA. Now CBI is reporting DOPT. I don't understand the logic. Anyway, it doesn't matter whether you report to DOPT or MHA, but CBC should go. These, and fourth, you see, there are tremendous vacancies. So they should be filled up, and some additional posts should be created so that additional workload can be taken. And the last point that I wish to make is that indiscriminate stays being granted by the courts, particularly in corruption cases. Murder cases happens rarely, rape cases happens rarely, but prevention of corruption cases, it happens a drop of a hat because big people are involved in that. Some kind of self-control. Judiciary is sovereign. Nobody can do anything about it. They should, exercise some kind of self-control so that the cases are not derailed. Thank you.
And Mr. Azad, close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
Yeah, let me say that the common sense can never come before constitution. But by the way, Britain does not have a constitution. It works pretty well, and it works pretty well on common sense. I object to the fact that every issue in India today is thrown to the constitution, and it's only the lawyers who keep interpreting it as per the side they are taking. CBI today, the most serious issue facing the country today is corruption. There is a clarion call given for fighting corruption. From Transparency International to the Prime Minister to everyone is talking about corruption. And yet, as Mr. M.L. Sharma says, the new tendering process, etc., has nothing has happened on the corruption front. And that's why, unless CBI to fight corruption has the powers like the NIA, I think the corruption will never go from this country because the states are very, very reluctant. And my last point is that states are very reluctant to spend even on the security budget. You'll get a third-rate security if your budget does not reflect it. And that's why the time is today when the states and the center have to get together on this point as to what should be the role of CBI, what is the kind of leadership and how it should be selected.
Absolutely. Points well taken. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, what's coming out of this discussion is that withdrawal of consent to the CBI by the states is a political gimmick. The thought process is faulty, as the CBI is the best investigating agency that we have. The CBI has a high conviction rate and their forensics is unmatched. Sometimes cases, however, go slow as unwanted cases are thrust on the agency and it has to deal with them delicately. That said, the federal structure and the constitution should prevail and everything needs to be done in that framework. Going forward, the states should restore consent and some kind of a framework needs to be worked out as to what kind of cases the CBI will handle. Everything in the CBI is dependent on the director. A good one who is unbiased needs to be appointed, and vacancies in the agency need to be filled up at the earliest. Well, before I go, let me once again remind you to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the video as well so that more people get to know about us. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive information. If you like our content, please contribute to keep it alive. A small contribution that you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. Let me also inform you about the Bharata First Knowledge Center, your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. I'll be starting live big picture current affairs classes very soon, so don't miss the chance to interact with me directly. Go to kc.bharatafirst.com and register right now. Hundreds are reaping the benefits of the Knowledge Center. Don't be left behind. All this information along with some must-see recommendations are in the description of the video. Please go through it. That's it from me. See you again next time.